Welcome, bienvenidos, benvindu to the Soccermetrics Copa Libertadores show, part of the SDH network, the only English language show devoted to South America's premier club competition. I'm your host, Howard Hamilton, the founder of Soccermetrics. We're coming out of the international break, and at long last the field of 48 for the World Cup is settled. Attention shifts back to club football as the leagues and continental tournaments in the Northern Hemisphere reach the decisive end of their competitions. But here in South America, the leagues are in full flower as the weather turns colder. And next week, the group stage of the Copa Libertadores will kick off. In this episode, I will share the first of my historical vignettes for this season. It's the story of a competition that was related to the Libertadores, unique to this part of the world, and emblematic of the intense rivalries that exist in club football in South America. But first, we start, as always, with news from around the Libertadores. And the first news item involves the matter of visiting fans. Will there be any at several Libertadores venues? One big match of interest is Universidad Católica hosting Boca Juniors next week in Santiago. Universidad Católica don't want Boca fans around. They don't want them coming to Chile. Chilean clubs are on notice after two serious incidents involving clubs in Libertadores and Sudamericana. So all eyes will be on the scenes in Santiago next week. And everyone from Chilean officials to CONMEBOL are really hoping that that match concludes without incident outside or inside the stadium. Católica, as I said, didn't want Boca fans to attend. They were extremely reluctant to release visiting tickets, and that presents a problem because under CONMEBOL regulations, visiting fans are required to be allowed to attend Libertadores and Sudamericana matches. CONMEBOL were pressuring the Chileans to release 2,000 tickets by penalty of fines and other sanctions. Finally, Católica relented. The match will take place at their arena, the newly renovated Claro Arena. It has a 20,000 seat capacity, and they will be opening up capacity to 2,000 visiting fans from Argentina. But there will be no ticket sales made to the general public. Only members of Universidad Católica will be allowed to attend the match, as far as people from within Chile. And there'll be around 14,000 of those. And the club's explanation for that was because of the security protocols that they wanted to enforce within the stadium, restricting ticket sales only to club members allow them to impose the required segregation of seating to allow the match to proceed without incident. There have also been incidents of fan groups involving both teams puffing out their chests and threatening each other. Probably a lot of bluster, but after the incidents last year, after the incidents in recent years in Chile, the club and local officials are taking all precautions to ensure, once again, that this match proceeds without incident, and I truly hope that it does. On the other side of the continent, you have the Peñarol president, Juan Ignacio Rubio, writing a letter to his own fans, telling them about the need to be clear-eyed about the risks of overseas travel. In a letter that he wrote to club members and published to local media, he said early in his letter that, quote, accompanying the Carboneros is not a tourist trip. He went on to delineate the risk of fights, encounters with rival factions of the opposing team, the risk of encountering different standards and protocols of security that fans may not be accustomed to in Uruguay, the risk of detentions, the risk of complex legal proceedings that may be confusing to Uruguayan citizens, also the risk of jail time. He went on to say that the club would work to coordinate the best security possible, but he emphasized that each fan must take responsibility to ensure their safety. Peñarol are also on notice. There were incidents involving Peñarol fans and police in a Copa Libertadores semifinal a couple of years ago. He concluded his letter by saying, quote, "Let's keep making Peñarol great responsibly so that the dream remains a dream and not a nightmare." And his letter really emphasizes some points that a lot of visitors, particularly from North America, take for granted, but you really do need to be clear-eyed about following your team when they travel overseas for matches. And a lot of his reminders of the risks are just really, or things that you really need to take into account. Basically, keep your eye on a swivel, be clear-eyed, stay out of trouble, anticipate trouble before it materializes, and don't do anything stupid. Next news item involves new managers for Libertadores group stage sides. There has been a lot of turnover among teams participating in Libertadores. No fewer than 16 teams have announced changes in management since the beginning of the year. They involve Rosario Central, where Ariel Olan left and was replaced by Jorge Almiron. Another thing to really notice is that there's been a merry-go-round. There's been a carousel of coaches leaving one Libertadores side, and then join up with another side that will be participating in Libertadores. And there are a number of cases here with these changes. Estudiantes de La Plata announced the arrival of Alexander Medina at the beginning of the year. Nacional saw Hudson Vieira leave. He was replaced by Jorge Bava, who left Cerro Porteño and was replaced by the aforementioned Ariel Olan. Coquimbo Unido of Chile announced the arrival of Hernan Caputo at the beginning of the year. Sporting Cristal, despite advancing to the group stage, saw Brazilian manager Paulo Autuori leave after several years, and he was replaced recently by Say Ricardo. The biggest change, the most high-profile change, has been the departure of Felipe Luis, leaving Flamengo, and he was replaced by Leonardo Jardim. Hernan Crespo, another surprise departure, left Sao Paulo, and he was replaced by Roger Machado. Another high-profile change occurred at Cruzeiro, where former Brazilian manager Chiche left the club, and he was replaced by Portuguese manager Arthur Jorge. And in Peru, Cusco saw the departure of Miguel Rondelli, and he was replaced by Alejandro Orfila. Other clubs that saw arrivals of new managers were Deportivo La Guaira, Héctor Bigolio, Independiente del Valle, Joaquín Papa, Universitario, Javier Rabanal, Santa Fe, Pablo Repeto, Libertad, Francisco Arce, and Platense with the arrival of Walter Zunino. The final news item deals with the Copa Libertadores Under-20 final. Now, this competition has been going on for about 15 years. It's at a single site every year. It occurs in the early part of the year. This year it took place in Ecuador during the month of March. And the winner was a club that doesn't really experience South American success. It was Santiago Wanderers of Chile. They defeated Flamengo who had won the competition the previous 2 seasons, 5-4 on penalties after a 1-1 draw. It's the first time that a Chilean club has won the Copa Libertadores at the under-20 level. And Cristian Silva, the striker for Santiago Wanderers, was the top scorer with 4 goals. So those are the major news items from around the Libertadores. That concludes part 1. In part 2, the historical vignette for this podcast. Part 2 of the Soccermetrics Copa Libertadores show, part of the SDH network. And now it's time for the historical vignette, the first one of the season. And it has to do with a competition that was related to the Libertadores, involved some classic teams from that competition. It was a short-term competition. It lasted for 10 years, but it created some memorable and intense matches of that period. I'm referring to the Supercopa Libertadores. The Supercopa Libertadores had some other names over its history, such as the Supercopa Sudamericana and the Supercopa João Havelange. Now, it's worth describing the landscape of South American football in the mid-1980s. The Copa Libertadores was not a year-long competition. It took place over a period of 4 months, usually in the first half of the year. At 1988, it actually took place in the middle of the year, from June to October, but in years after that, it occupied a slot of time between February and the middle of the year. The competition tended to wrap up in May or June, unless it was a World Cup year, in which case it would take a break and come back in August or September. Another thing to keep in mind is that only the league champion and the runners-up from each domestic league appeared in Copa Libertadores. In Europe during this time, only the league champion appeared in the European Champions Cup. So it wasn't too much of a difference. There were 2 berths per country because there were only 10 countries in CONMEBOL, and the organizers always wanted to have more teams in the competition and more clubs from individual countries. The other thing to keep in mind is that the Copa Libertadores was the only game in town as far as club tournaments organized by CONMEBOL. So because of that, a number of former champions in the competition hadn't participated in Copa Libertadores in multiple seasons. And in some cases, it was decades since they last participated in the competition. Racing Club, who won the competition in 1967, had appeared in Copa Libertadores in 20 years. Cruzeiro, who won in the 1970s, hadn't appeared in Libertadores in 10 years. Grêmio hadn't appeared in 5. Santos, who were the first all-conquering side, Pele's team in the early 1960s, they had appeared in Copa Libertadores but once since 1965. Boca Juniors had made only 2 appearances since 1979. They won the competition in 1978. So, it's hard to go back to 1988 and find news articles that described the deliberations that were going on within CONMEBOL. But I can make an educated guess based on actions that CONMEBOL have made from the 1990s to today. And I think it's safe to say that the justification for this competition was that CONMEBOL wanted to make a buck. The classic teams of Libertadores wanted ticket gates, and it was something that was also intriguing to the fans. The concept was, let's have a tournament reserved only for the former winners of the Copa Libertadores. At the time, in 1988, there were 13 different winners of South America's top club competition. Peñarol Nacional from Uruguay, Racing Club, Estudiantes de La Plata, Independiente, Boca Juniors, and River Plate from Argentina, Argentinos Juniors as well, Olimpia of Paraguay, and Santos, Cruzeiro, Flamengo, and Grêmio of Brazil. So this is a roster from which you could build a really intriguing competition. And so the Sudamericana Libertadores kicked off in 1988. It was run before the Libertadores, from February to June. And it was a knockout format over 2 legs. It was kind of unwieldy because there were only 13 participants. The round of 16, in quotes, was actually a round that took place with 12 teams. The 13th team, which was drawn by random, went straight to the semifinal. The rest of the teams played a 2-leg aggregate series with away goals and penalties if required. One of those winners would advance straight to the semifinal. The quarterfinal round involved 5 winners from the first round, plus Nacional. The semifinal involved 3 winners, plus 1 team that advanced from the quote-unquote round of 16, the 1/8 round. The interesting thing about the 1/8 round was that 5 of the 6 ties were won by the team hosting the second leg. Argentinos, Grêmio, and River Plate overcoming first leg deficits. River overcoming an 0-2 deficit to Olimpia. Cruzeiro defeated Independiente in both legs. And Racing Club won the first leg at home to Santos and rode out a scoreless draw in Brazil to advance to the semifinals directly. In the quarterfinal round, it was Cruzeiro and Nacional who were dominant over both legs. Cruzeiro defeating Argentinos by 1-0 results. Nacional defeating Flamengo emphatically, 3-0 thrashing at home, and a 2-0 result at Maracanã. And I always find it fascinating to see Uruguayan clubs get up for matches at the Maracanã. And River overcame another away deficit at Grêmio to rout them 3-1 Monumental and advance to the semifinals. In the semis that year, Cruzeiro survived in Montevideo. They went down 3-2 to Nacional, and they got that goal in Brazil that put them through on away goals. Racing had a much tougher encounter versus River Plate. They won 2-1 in an intense match in Avellaneda, and then they went to the northern part of Buenos Aires and scored a dramatic last-minute goal that put them through to the final. So the first final of the Sudamericana, of the Super Copa Libertadores, was set. Cruzeiro took the lead in the first leg. Racing equalized and scored the winner near full time to give them a 2-1 victory. And then in the second leg, played before over 110,000 at the Mineirão in Belo Horizonte, Omar Catalan effectively decided the title for Racing Club. A late equalizer arriving too late for the home side, and Racing Club would win the first Supercopa 3-2 on aggregate. It was the first time that Racing Club had won any competition in over 20 years, and it was one that was widely celebrated in Avellaneda, throughout Argentina, to be honest, and to this day, Racing Club still lists that tournament victory as one of their memorable trophies over their history. Argentine teams would continue to dominate through the following season. In 1989, it was Atlético Nacional, the 1989 Libertadores winners, who were allowed to participate. So the field expanded from 13 teams to 14. It also shifted to a 6-week competition from October to November, keeping the same format. And in the final, Boca Juniors defeated Independiente 5-3 on penalties after a goalless draw over both legs. This tie established the legend of Carlos Navarro Montoya. He was a Colombian goalkeeper who played at Boca Juniors. He became a nationalized Argentine citizen, and he was famous for saving a penalty in the 4th round of the penalty kick shootout. This was the first title of any kind that Boca had won since 1981, a league title that was led by Diego Maradona. And the quote that has persisted from that final was from a couple of Boca players. One in particular who said that Supercopa win was like winning a Libertadores. So it really fascinating to see that, for a tournament that seemed to be an exhibition tournament, clearly a power and money grab by CONMEBOL. The clubs, particularly in Argentina and in the southern cone of South America, were taking to it intensely and viewing victory in that competition as almost equivalent to that of a Copa Libertadores. In 1990, the Supercopa moved to a slot in the calendar after the Copa Libertadores, taking place from October to early January. Atlético Nacional were eligible, but they were barred from the competition because of a ban imposed by CONMEBOL on international matches in Colombia. There were armed threats made to referees right before a knockout stage match in Copa Libertadores the previous season. This was the peak of the narco football era in Colombia. And that's a topic worthy of a future Soccermetrics Copa Libertadores show broadcast. The winner of this competition was Olimpia. Olimpia had won Copa Libertadores in 1990. They defeated River Racing Club and Peñarol on the way to the final. And they routed Nacional in the final, scoring 20 goals in the competition along the way and wrapping up a Libertadores Supercopa double. This was one of 2 years in the competition without a team from Argentina in the final. The standout player of the competition was Raúl Amarilla of Olimpia, who was the leading goal scorer with 7 goals. In 1991, the competition expanded even further after Colo-Colo won the Libertadores for the first time. Atlético Nacional stayed away, though. And in this season, the Supercopa trophy finally shifted northward to Brazil as Cruzeiro ran out winners. This was part of a, not quite a golden era, but really a silver era for Cruzeiro. Defeating Colo-Colo on penalties in the first round, they routed Nacional at home and withstood a comeback attempt on the road. They overcame Olimpia on penalties after 2 tight matches, and they overturned a 2-0 first leg deficit to defeat River Plate in the final. In 1992, CONMEBOL established a second, or actually a third competition for club teams called the Copa CONMEBOL. This was a direct equivalent to the UEFA Cup at the time. So teams that were not quite good enough to advance to Copa Libertadores, they weren't former winners, but they were ranked highly enough in their domestic leagues, earned a berth to this competition. And this competition became ranked, this was the 3rd ranked competition on the CONMEBOL tier of club competitions. The Supercopa was number 2, Libertadores was number 1. And in 1992, Sao Paulo joined the party after winning the Copa Libertadores. Atlético Nacional returned to the fold, CONMEBOL allowing Colombian clubs back in to continental competitions, and Atletico would duly lose 8-0 at Cruzeiro in the second leg of the first round. Cruzeiro went on to repeat as champions of the Supercopa. After that first round encounter, they narrowly got past River Plate on penalties after 2-0 results by both teams. They had a tense victory over Olimpia in the semifinal, and they defeated Racing Club 4-1 on aggregate, using a 4-0 first leg rout to power them to the title. Renato Gaucho was the top scorer in the tournament with 6 goals for Cruzeiro. 1993 saw the dawn of Ronaldo and also saw peak Sao Paulo. This was a period where Sao Paulo had won multiple Libertadores titles. They defeated clubs such as Milan and Barcelona in the Intercontinental Cup. This was truly a super club in South American football. And they showed what they were capable of in the Supercopa, defeating Flamengo in the penalty kick shootout after a 4-4 aggregate draw. Leonardo and Juninho scored all of Sao Paulo's goals over both legs. Marquinhos of Flamengo scored 3 goals over both legs for the Rio de Janeiro side. And this was the other Supercopa final that didn't involve an Argentine team in the final. Now, Ronaldo, he made his mark in this competition. Playing for Cruzeiro, he scored 8 goals over the 4 matches in which he appeared for the Belo Horizonte side, and he ended the competition as top scorer despite Cruzeiro getting knocked out at the quarterfinal stage. 1994 saw a new Copa Libertadores winner, Vélez Sarsfield, but because the Libertadores final ended the week before the Supercopa started, Vélez didn't participate. Nevertheless, the competition was eventful. It saw a River Boca matchup won by Boca on penalty. It saw the eclipse of Olympia's golden era. It saw 2 semifinal matches involving clubs between Brazil and Argentina, both won by Argentine sides. Boca narrowly, Independiente emphatically, and in the final, Independiente won an international trophy after 10 years, defeating Boca Juniors. Sebastian Rambert scored the equalizer in the first leg, and he would score the winner in the second leg. He would finish as top goal scorer with 5 goals. His teammate Alberto Usuriaga scored 4 goals for Independiente and was the second top scorer. In 1995, Vélez finally joined the Supercopa, and the competition expanded to 17 teams. Now you can have a proper competition. You still have that 17th team to deal with, and so the Supercopa changed its format. 14 teams were in knockout ties among themselves, and the remaining 3 teams were drawn into a group stage from which the winner would advance. And then after that round, you would have 8 teams, and the competition would proceed as normal. The top scorer from this competition was Enzo Francescoli. The great River Plate midfielder scored 7 goals, and he scored in every match in which River scored a goal. At the end, Independiente repeated as champions, defeating Santos on penalties, overturning a first leg deficit versus Atlético Nacional, who really weren't taking this competition seriously. defeated River on penalties, and then defeated Flamengo 2-1 on aggregate in the final. 1996 saw the peak of Vélez Sarsfield in South American football. Adding to that Libertadores win in 1994, they won the league title in 1995, and they won the Superliga in 1996, running through that competition unbeaten. They pushed past Gremio, who had won the Libertadores competition in 1995, 4-3 on aggregate in the first round. They routed Olimpia in both legs of the quarterfinal. They defeated Santos 3-2 on aggregate in the semifinal. A penalty by Jose Luis Chilavert, giving them a first leg win in Brazil. And they defeated Cruzeiro in both legs of the final. Another late Chilavert penalty in Brazil, giving them the win, and then sealing the title with 2 goals in the first 10 minutes in Liniers. Mauricio Camps was the top goal scorer in the competition, scoring 4 goals for Vélez. And then finally in 1997, what turned out to be the final year of the competition, saw the peak of River Plate. And not only the peak of River, it was also the peak of Chilean strikers in South American club competitions. Vasco da Gama was admitted, expanding this competition to 18 teams. And the reason why Vasco da Gama was admitted was CONMEBOL finally recognized that the 1948 South American Championship of Champions was the first continental club championship in South America. And then, as it turned out, Vasco da Gama would go on to win Copa Libertadores in 1997. The format changed once again. Argentinos Juniors, the 1985 winners of Libertadores, had seen themselves relegated from Argentina's Primera División after close to 35 years. So they were not eligible to participate in Superliga anymore. The field reduced to 17 teams. From those 17, there was a preliminary group of 3 teams, Vasco, Peñarol, and Nacional. Then there was a round-robin group stage, and the top 2 teams from that group advanced to the next round. From there were 4 groups of 4 teams. The winners of the groups advanced to the semifinals, and the last place teams were relegated from Supercopa. Not sure if they would have been eligible to appear in the competition after taking a year off. But in the end, the group stage saw Boca Juniors, Vélez Sarsfield, Racing Club, and Gremio being relegated from the Supercopa. In the semifinals, there were 2 intriguing ties between River Plate and Atlético Nacional. A brace by Marcelo Salas in the first leg gave River a 2-0 advantage, and then a Marcelo Gallardo goal restored the 2-goal cushion for the Buenos Aires side, and they would run out 3-2 winners on the aggregate. In the other semifinal, Sao Paulo faced Colo-Colo, and Sao Paulo won both legs to run out 4-1 winners. So the final saw River Plate hosting Sao Paulo, or facing Sao Paulo over both legs. River, the Libertadores 96 champions, and they were also on the cusp of achieving a domestic three-peat in Argentina, something that had not been achieved before or since. Sao Paulo, for their part, were on the tail end of their golden era from the early 1990s. These would turn out to be hard-fought encounters. The first leg ended goalless. Sergio Berti was sent off for River Plate. But in the second leg, Marcelo Salas was the protagonist. He opened the scoring seconds into the second half, and after Dodô scored an equalizer for Sao Paulo, Salas would appear again 6 minutes later to slot home the winner. This intense match saw two players sent off, one for each side. Marcelinho for Sao Paulo, Leo Estrada for River Plate. But in the end, River would run out 2-1 winners on the aggregate. They would win the Supercopa Libertadores. Ivo Basay of Colo-Colo was top goal scorer with 8 goals. As I said, this turned out to be the final year of Supercopa Libertadores. In 1998, there were plans to replace the Supercopa with a cup competition of past Supercopa winners. And at the time, there were 8 different clubs that had won the Supercopa Libertadores. And I think the proposed name of this competition was the Masters Cup of the Supercopa, or the Masters Cup of South America. And it was supposed to be played between the end of May and the beginning of June. All matches would have taken place in Avejaneda. It wasn't clear whether it was going to take place at Independiente or Racing or at both stadiums. Keep in mind they're only 200 meters apart. But because of a lack of sponsors, the competition was postponed until after the World Cup. And then after the World Cup, CONMEBOL took another look at this proposed competition and concluded that it was really stupid and canceled it altogether. But by 1998, the landscape of South American club football had changed. Out went the Copa CONMEBOL, out went the Supercopa Libertadores, and in their places came the Copa America Norte and the Copa America Sur, competitions involving teams from the northern side of South America, and as well as Mexico and the United States. That was the case of the Copa America Norte and the Copa America Sur, involving countries of the southern cone of South America. And then finally, those two competitions were combined in 2001 to become the Copa Sudamericana, which persists to the current day. Now, there have been rumors and ideas of reviving the Supercopa. There are a lot more teams that have won the competition since then. There are currently 27 champion clubs of Libertadores as of 2026. They represent a wider range of South America, more clubs from Colombia, clubs from Ecuador. Alejandro Dominguez, president of CONMEBOL, revisited the concept of the Supercopa in 2019 with the idea of feeding into extra berths for the 2021 FIFA Club World Cup. That plan didn't get beyond the planning stage, and there have been rumors of reviving this competition, but now in this era of fixture congestion, and also the fact that the Copa Libertadores is now an 8-month competition. It lasts practically the entire year, and as well as Copa Sudamericana lasts the entire year. There's less of a need for it. So the Super Copa Sudamericana is a competition that is definitely in the rearview mirror. The chances of it coming back are very unlikely. So what did the Supercopa rot? The Supercopa Sudamericana was a short-term competition. It was a competition that was a clear money grab by CONMEBOL and its highest profile teams in the competition, the former winners of the competition. But it was a competition that provided surprisingly intense and fiercely competed matches. And the interesting thing about this competition was that it was especially intense in the Southern Cone. Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, Brazil, not so much Chile, Colo-Colo had some deep runs, particularly in the final season. But matches in Supercopa were particularly intense among teams in Argentina, Uruguay, and Brazil. And there were some memorable matches and moments. Independiente's titles, Racing Club winning an international title after 20 years. It was a chance where teams that were in their golden era could demonstrate their dominance, such as Olimpia, Sao Paulo, River Plate, Cruzeiro. So really classic matches involving classic teams from this competition. It was an interesting, it showed an interesting perspective to South American football in the 1980s and 1990s. But it's a competition that is definitely in the rearview mirror, but one worth examining as part of the rich history of South American football. So that is it. And if you have a comment or a question about this podcast or about the Libertadores, you're welcome to send them to my X handle at Soccermetrics. You can also send questions or comments to @SoccerDownHere or to Jason Longshore at Longshoe. This show is also distributed on YouTube and Facebook, and you can follow the conversations there. Next week kicks off the group stage of Copa Libertadores, so I'll be back to preview Match Day 1. This has been the Soccermetrics Copa Libertadores show, proudly part of the SDH network. See you later. Hasta luego, e até mais.